Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our colleagues and clients around the world. Thank you very much for joining us for this flash briefing on Iran and related issues. We acknowledge that these are difficult times for many of you. Many of our clients are struggling with issues around the world related to this incident and these ongoing incidences. As you know, we've been closely monitoring the situation in Iran since it began, and we will continue to do so for all of you. In addition, we also continue to monitor and report upon other volatile situations around the world, such as the recent flare-up along the Afghan and Pakistan border, and ongoing issues related to Russia and the Ukraine. Many of you have been receiving our daily, if not hourly, updates at this point from our Middle East intelligence team, and will continue to do so. For those who do not, but would like to, please reach out to us directly, and so that we can tailor our intelligence feeds to suit your needs specifically. This session is for you. Please ask as many questions as you possibly can. You'll be able to do so at the bottom of your screens. We will attempt to get to as many questions as possible. Many have already come in, so we will get to them in the order that they come in. We're going to cover as much ground. This is a highly volatile situation, and this is the longest period of time that Sam will have not looked at his phone and watched the intel feeds come in. So we'll take advantage of this time period. Thanks again to everyone, and I will join you at the end of the session. Now over to Jeremy and Sam.
Thanks so much, Don, and good to be with you all here today during these extraordinary times. I'm going to keep my remarks very brief right now because the time is really for Sam to brief everybody. And look, we're very lucky to have Sam Worby with us today. Sam's an expert on Iran and Gulf geopolitics. He's a senior advisor to Interfor International, and he's frankly the best expert we have on our broader Middle East team of geopolitical experts. So I want to just quickly reinforce what Don said. This time is yours, and we want you to feel free to ask questions. I have several for Sam, but we're going to start today by turning the floor over to Sam, who I also wanted to add to as a Farsi reader, and I think that's really important too when it comes to understanding the dynamics within Iran. So Sam, things are changing so quickly right now. As Don mentioned, you're kind of drinking from the fire hose. Can you start us off with a briefing on where things stand today?
Of course. Yeah. Thanks, Jeremy. I'm very happy to be speaking with all of you today. So just a quick bottom line up front, what we are seeing is shaping up as, at least for now, a regime change objective war, not a limited strike. And we are, as of now, still on an escalatory trajectory. There hasn't been a significant slowing of the operational tempo or any significantly promising diplomacy as of yet that would indicate an off-ramp. To go into the details, we are on day 4 of U.S.-Israel strikes on Iran and Iranian strikes on Israel and the Gulf states, and the occasional strike on Cyprus. It feels like it's been longer than that for some of us, but it is in fact day 4. We do also have a major confrontation shaping up between Israel and Hezbollah, which we're not going to get into quite as much today. I wanted to caveat that there's tons and tons of news items, alerts hitting us constantly. We're not going to cover every single thing that's happened today, just kind of what we see as most significant and where things are headed. But I also want to add that there's just a ton of really low quality information and misinformation out there, and an annoying amount of my time goes toward vetting the reports that come in and making sure that they are significant enough to advise on. In any event, moving forward, I think very few of us were truly surprised that the US and Iran attacked when they did. The big surprise has been that they've gone this big, this early, that they, from the very beginning, were hitting regime targets. The kind of interesting strategic logic here is that because Iran spent so many months now signaling that any further attack would trigger an all-out response, Trump's team saw no major additional cost to going for a bigger operation. Either way, the Gulf states, per their logic, would have been hit. That said, I think there was an anticipation as well that the Iranian strikes would primarily target U.S. military bases in the Gulf states. Those attacks have been far less discriminate than that. Hotels, airports have been impacted. Not to mention, they've even hit Oman a couple times, which is not just neutral, but has been continuing to advocate, in essence, on Iran's behalf for a continuation of diplomacy. In terms of the U.S.-Israel strike picture, what they've been hitting, there have been 3 kind of primary buckets. The first, like I said, is regime. That's not just these major strikes we've seen, including the impressive strike at the beginning of the conflict that killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and some other senior command. But we're seeing kind of a much lower level targeting of regime infrastructure. Even local special police units with links to the IRGC out in the northwest corner of the country. And we're seeing border control units hit. There's kind of what looks like some sort of softening of the ground, hoping that this will prevent further suppression of protests or even armed resistance in the country if that does spark up. So all of this really suggests that the goal isn't just to describe the objective as regime change. The actual objective is regime change for now. There have also been kind of major nuclear and military infrastructure hits, as we expected, some of these using some of those bunker buster munitions. And then the last piece, and in some ways the most critical for now, is the targeting of infrastructure and sometimes mobile units that are actually launching missiles and drones at the Gulf and Israel and the US presence in the region. This is the trickiest part and the kind of the area we're most focused on. And in short, what's happening here is we will expect the Iranians to run out of ballistic missiles sooner rather than later. But their drone arsenal, at some point recently was around 80,000. This is something they could theoretically do for a while. The drones are in the back of trucks, and it's not as though one target strike is going to mitigate this threat. They're also, because they can be fired at really high volumes, not especially easy to mitigate with air defense. Excuse me. A lot to say. So just in terms of what we're tracking and what we think is going to shape how things move ahead, as I was just saying, can this drone threat be mitigated? Can the kind of runway for Gulf states to defend themselves from these air attacks be extended? There's been a lot of mixed reporting about the stocks of interceptors and air defense tools for the Gulf states and whether or not they're on the verge of running out if the current pace of Iranian attacks continues. Articles saying they are going to run out, articles saying the US will resupply them, articles saying the US won't resupply them. All of this is rumors, but our anticipation is that between a combination of the Iranian attacks gradually slowing and the fact that resupply is not particularly challenging, at least in the short term, we're not expecting these states to suddenly be undefended from the air in a moment where the war is continuing at its current tempo. Next, we're looking at the Islamic Republic itself and how it's surviving. We've seen a lot of really high-level strikes. Just today, a strike on the building housing the Assembly of Experts, which was supposedly in the process of voting in a new supreme leader. Unclear if that strike had a lot of fatalities, rumors that the building was evacuated ahead of time, but unclear. At the same time, Ali Larijani, the former Speaker of Parliament, who then became a senior advisor to the supreme leader, seems to be being kept alive deliberately. There's signals that he's the one the US feels somewhat comfortable negotiating with, at least for now. Doesn't mean he won't be killed tomorrow or even by mistake, but for the moment, he seems to be the one on the other side of the negotiating table once that negotiating table is live again. But in the meantime, what we're looking at is who survives and what deals or offers might actually be proposed in the near term. Our sense is that there have already been off-ramps proposed, probably by the Iranians, and they would be ignored. That might continue, but there are some things that could change Trump's mind on that. As we've said, we think that this regime change objective is a genuine commitment for now, but it is also in Trump's DNA to use those types of threats to pressure and push for a compromise that is in many cases short of his top objective as he's described it. So what are some things that could change Trump's direction on this and get him to compromise, whether or not that's his current plan? I think more bad US or Israeli strikes that have lots of civilian casualties, strikes in the Gulf, Iranian strikes that take out significant numbers of civilians, in particular as this kind of interceptor problem and the missile math discussion gets a little bit louder in the media. And on the back of that, just pressure from allies to slow things down or to return to the negotiating table. For now, that's not really where things seem to be. And the Gulf allies in particular, for the moment, with the exception of Oman, are not really pushing negotiations. If anything, there are rumors circulating that the UAE and then to a lesser degree, Saudi could become involved in attacking Iran. And the last point here is just on proxies. As we've said, Hezbollah did attack Israel kind of in solidarity with Iran, and now there is that war kind of alive again. But beyond that, will the Houthis get involved? That could be a really significant change to the threat for U.S. and allies in the region. They've got missiles, they have drones, and they're pretty difficult to attack just based on geography and how ingrained they are compared to certain other groups. That said, they have a lot to lose at this point. They're not really facing resistance within the country now. They're in the north. They're on a path toward some sort of unification with the South in the long term. And the Saudis up till now are supporting that truce. So I'm not expecting them to get involved at any moment, but it really could happen. Next is just, will Hamas do anything? I think, again, a lot to lose if they start firing rockets at Israel in solidarity with Iran. The ceasefire, such as it is, collapses. That war is alive again. So looking ahead, I think what we're tracking beyond what I've just mentioned are also kind of how's the regime change picture evolving? If regime change is the objective, kind of what version of it? Who is Trump listening to? Right now, he seems to be taking Israeli advice quite seriously in terms of what targets to hit in Iran, hence the very broad regime change-oriented strike packages. But that could change. There might be differing voices in his administration again, as there were in the lead up to the strikes. But again, just to close this off, I think the expectation for now should be continued escalation, perhaps not to an exceptionally higher height than it already is, but we haven't necessarily peaked. Things aren't slowing down yet. And I will leave things there. Back to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Sam. That was really informative. You referenced the attacks on the Gulf states. These attacks are rather perplexing in many ways. Can you talk to us a little bit about what Iran has hoped to achieve by attacking its neighbors and how that's going?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of discussion of this. I think it's counterintuitive to a lot of us and the way we would expect our heads of states to strategize about these things. But the Iranians, what they think is, let's not bomb just our adversaries, let's bomb partners and allies who happen to have good relationships with the US. These are people who, countries like the UAE, Qatar, even Oman, who, if they're made to suffer enough, will pressure Trump to end the war. So far, that's maybe happened a little bit here and there, but for the most part, it's backfired. You see, as I mentioned, kind of the Emiratis purportedly threatening to get involved in the war offensively. The Saudis, too, although they dispute it whenever that's reported. And you've seen the Qatari government even shoot down a couple of Iranian fighter jets. So I'll add also that their very broad targeting, the Iranians, of the Gulf states is part of what has gotten the UK, France, Germany on side. The UK didn't want the US to use its airspace before the war started, or its territory. And now that's obviously, back on the table. So this has backfired for Iran for the moment. But that was their plan, at the very least, is to use it to generate pressure on the US.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the outlook here. We kind of hinted at that at the beginning. Oil markets have spiked, stock markets are rattled, the Straits of Hormuz is closed, and oil infrastructure around the Gulf have been targeted. What's the prospect for the conflict intensifying or resolving in your view, Sam?
Specifically with regard to the elements impacting the oil and gas market, I'm thinking about what might resolve or escalate. I think there's what everything hinges on is how long the current situation lasts. Obviously, we've seen a significant stoppage of LNG production in Qatar. We've seen a refinery partially shut down or fully shut down in Saudi Arabia. And we've seen an effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz, although notably it's not physically closed, but it's an uninsurable route for the moment. If this lasts another couple days, I think you'll see that be a much larger impact. Trump, however, unlike a lot of other presidents, seems okay with a certain amount of pain, or at the very least is stubborn enough to not kind of shift his approach just because oil prices spike. I think his most recent comment was, well, they'll go down when the war ends. So I'm not sure that this is going to be the lever that ends the war, but I think there will be a significant price crisis if this is going on 2 weeks from now and things either haven't changed or have gotten worse. But we'll see. I think there's certainly, especially from the Gulf states, between their airports being closed on and off or fully, and the Strait of Hormuz being tightened, if not closed, there is really significant pressure for something to give there. The U.S. has been targeting the Iranian naval elements that are threatening shipping in the Gulf. So there's a possibility that it will abate. And I think that if anything, it's maybe slightly likelier that things will get better there versus worse in the next few days. But I think it's probably equally possible that things will stay where they are.
Got it. Now, I have a couple more questions for Sam. There's some really good ones flowing in here, and I'm actually going to attempt to weave in one aspect of a question from someone in the audience. Sam, I want to talk to you about regime change. The U.S. says it wants it. Obviously, the Israelis do. What are some actual scenarios about how this could work out? And to bring in the question from the audience, I'm sure you're going to talk in that respect about Reza Pahlavi. But can you talk a little bit about the minorities, the Kurds, the Azeris, the Balukis, and the Bazaris as well as a part of those potential questions on regime change, if it makes sense to you?
Sure. Yeah. I think there's kind of a pre and post here where there's the way we were all talking about regime change just a few days ago before the conflict started, and then the way things are looking now. I think a very practical kind of guidance I gave on this just a few days ago mostly still applies. And I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to update it. So there are kind of multiple tiers of regime change, even one of which obviously is more like regime moderation. At the top of that, the least change is a scenario where new leadership rises, perhaps just on the basis of the old leadership being dead. So we already have Ali Larijani seemingly making lots of decisions. We know the U.S. doesn't totally hate working with him compared to the past options that the U.S. has had. Could Larijani, combined with a few other leaders, kind of commit to some level of reforms and certainly commit to a less aggressive defense and foreign policy, not to mention nuclear, and end the war with that kind of offer to Trump? I would have said a few days ago that that would have been a normal way for a war, especially one with limited strikes or a limited scope of strikes, to end. I'm not sure that's still the case, just given how extensive the regime strikes have been. To the extent Trump is, really leaning toward a more comprehensive extent of regime change, this would not really check that box. Next, there is kind of a subsequent tier, and everyone focuses on Reza Pahlavi, and we will get to that. But there is a kind of an in-between area here of former officials in Iran or known reform movement characters, people who have been out of government for a decade or 2 decades or even 3 decades, or are known activists and have really recent experience in Iranian civil society and politics. Maybe they're in the diaspora now, maybe they're not. But there's kind of certainly appetite for people like that to have a role in the new Iran. I would stop short of saying that there's an obvious leader, but you could see people who were, for example, tied to the reformist presidential campaigns in 2009 or anything else like that kind of enter into the conversation as kind of a more significant compromise, but not all the way to Pahlavi. In the kind of full-on regime change scenario, there are a couple of competing forces. I would have said previously there are different options, but now I think they can be accurately described as in competition. One is Reza Pahlavi. His support has definitely grown, although a lot of the kind of slogans using his name in Iran are mostly just aimed at angering the regime.
Sam, can you talk a little bit about who he is for people who might not know?
Sure. Yeah. Reza Pahlavi is the son of the last Shah of Iran who left in 1979. He was the crown prince. Some people are calling him the Shah now, or the Shahzadeh, the crown prince. But he's, legally speaking, really just Reza Pahlavi. He could become any of those things in the future. I think what he's tried to describe is not reintroducing monarchy as his goal, but kind of serving as a transitional figure who helps to usher in democracy. But there's been a lot of criticism of him within the diaspora for having supporters who can be a little bit intense and highly critical and use somewhat aggressive and violent language against other Iranians in the diaspora who support different pieces of the opposition. In any event, getting back to what I was saying, the Pahlavi supporters and this kind of Shah revival scenario, to get there, you'd really be talking about probably an armed ground presence. Maybe there's some possibility of that coming from inside Iran, but so much of the regime would need to be gone for that to be viable that it is a more significant effort. That said, there is enthusiasm for it. It's something that I think the U.S. administration is interested in, if not having a preference for it. Uh, and yet, it's not the only option in this category. The Israelis, for a long time, have had this idea about kind of ethnic divisions in Iran, the fact that it's not a purely Persian country. There are Azeris, there are Kurds, there are Arabs, etc. And their thought has been that they could encourage some of the separatist or armed or other political movements among those populations to be the vanguard of armed resistance in Iran. Uh, that, for what it's worth, has received a lot of criticism, saying that that is the precise kind of process that would lead to civil war in a post-Islamic regime state. So, uh, and yet it does seem to be in process in a way. There's been a lot of activity on the Iraqi side of the border in Kurdistan, Trump speaking to Kurdish leaders there, even. And there does seem to be, as I said, US and Israeli airstrikes targeting the precise elements that would need to be moved out of the way for Kurds to cross the border uh, from Iraq with arms and begin resistance, take over territory, et cetera, in the northwest of the country. So that seems like the theory is that's where the Israelis are leaning. Again, they have a kind of a greater tolerance for a Iran in a perpetual state of chaos at the end of this war versus a stable government. So civil war in Iran is better than Ali Khamenei in power with a nuclear program. But there's a lot of concern, I think, in among people who want to see stable government in Iran that that's not the most viable approach.
Thank you, Sam. I just have one more question for you. We have some great questions in the queue. I encourage everybody to put a question in if you have something you want to ask Sam. I also want to note that we envisioned this briefing as a 30-minute briefing, but we could go a little bit over. Sam's been kind enough to spend a little bit longer with us if there's a robust discussion. So I just want to put that out there. And Sam, I have one final question for you here. I'm going to thread in an aspect of it. Someone in the audience is kind of reading my mind. Before this war started, we saw speculation that Iran could greenlight terror attacks around the world, even in the US. And so I want to ask you to what extent we still see that as a threat. And someone in the audience was asking about, how this could spread to the US. And they specifically were wondering about what are the chances of a 9/11 type of threat. So maybe you could get down in the weeds a little bit. We saw this shooting in Texas, kind of inspiring a lone wolf. So maybe you could parse out a little bit this kind of small lone wolf attack versus the kind of spectacular attack as you consider this response.
Right. So we know that this is the kind of thing that the current Iranian regime has had an interest in doing for a while. It came up in the last 10 years since Trump was elected the first time. There were assassination plots against John Bolton. There was one against Trump. And these plots tend to be foiled because they're just not handled expertly. The Iranians want to hold them at arm's length, and they have intermediaries hiring other intermediaries, hiring trigger pullers, et cetera. So thus far, they've failed somewhat spectacularly. And mostly they've been kind of smaller attack plans to begin with. I haven't, since kind of the attacks in Argentina in the 90s, I don't think we have seen the Iranians try to really create mass casualty events in around the world, but it's not to say that they haven't had plans in the works that have just not gone anywhere. The question is, given that they have been foiled somewhat consistently in the last decade, not to be overconfident, but they have been foiled, is there any reason to think that the central authority in Iran being under fire from US and Israeli airstrikes is somehow going to make these plots likelier to succeed in the US? I would say no. I would say, if anything, it's harder. However, I think the lone wolf idea kind of, I think about, the attack on Salman Rushdie in just a few years ago, kind of a Iran-inspired lone wolf. I still don't think that looks like an Al-Qaeda attack, but, assassinations or just attacks or anything else, obviously we see things outside the US quite a bit as well, Iran supporting groups or Shiite militias in Iraq, trying to storm embassies, et cetera. But as for attacks in the U.S., it's definitely a threat, and it's one that is quite difficult to predict. At the same time, it hasn't been successful yet, and we're just, I guess, hoping it stays that way. I just knocked on wood. I don't know if people caught that, but it's something we're watching very closely.
And obviously, attacks in the U.S. would put a lot of pressure on Trump as well. So something definitely worth watching. I want to return to the GCC. We have a question from an attendee on that is the following. What can we expect from other GCC governments given the regime change and war, and how they may respond, specifically nations like Kuwait, who are close U.S. allies? Also, how could it affect ongoing business with companies and sovereign wealth funds in the GCC?
I think there's a delicate balance that these states are managing for the moment, between wanting stability to be restored as quickly as possible, and obviously them launching fighter jets against Iran doesn't feel like it's enhancing stability or leading to a rapid conclusion of the war. So it feels like it's kind of against their DNA to do that, given that they really just want no war at all and they want this business to be as usual. At the same time, they need to inspire confidence among their people and the immigrants living in their countries, working in their countries, that they will protect them. So as a result, there's kind of a genuine consideration of becoming more involved in the conflict. I would say you'll see at least one of these states get more directly involved. I mentioned the Qataris already taking down Iranian jets. I'm not going to commit to saying that the Emiratis, for example, are going to, drop munitions over Iran, but it's not an unlikely scenario at the moment. So in terms of how they'll respond longer term, I think it's in their interest for this conflict to end within a month. The longer it goes on, the harder it gets to kind of restore the perception of the Gulf states as these kind of oases of security in the Gulf where American and European and Asian companies can all do business, et cetera. So that's kind of their approach for now, is trying to balance and manage the uncertainty and to reassure their population that they have it under control. And that there has been, for the record, a pretty impressive air defense effort from all of these countries thus far.
Thanks, Sam. That's illuminating. One of the attendees asked a question I think is really important. I haven't heard as much about Iraq yet, and I think that's going to be something of interest. So I'm wondering if you could please discuss the involvement of Iraq and the implications for Iraq's government formation period, if possible, if that's something you can speak to.
It's something I've been spending a little bit less time on, but of course, there's been some instability around this in Iraq, and I think the central government is quite concerned about a spike in instability from the Iran-linked militias. So they've been, as usual, not necessarily all that active in preempting that threat, but they are helping to, for example, secure the U.S. embassy against, being stormed by protesters or, militia members. In the meantime, I think everything changes if Kurds cross the border from Iraq. That would also bring in some sort of Turkish concern. But for the moment, I don't think we've seen the Iran-linked militias in Iraq get as involved as we would have expected. I believe they were preemptively attacked as well, so that might help. But there's certainly enough latent anger there. The Iranian regime has had a really long-standing relationship with a lot of groups there. And to them, this likely feels like they're under attack too. And yet they're not actually fully under attack. And presumably they want things to stay that way.
Got it. Let me turn our attention to European involvement here, and I might try to thread two questions together here. There's a lot of interesting ones coming in. Could you talk a little bit more about the attack on Cyprus and how you see Europe's involvement going forward? And also, a member of the audience is wondering about the risk of sleeper cells within EU borders and sabotage, cyber attacks, retaliatory measures if Europe gets more involved. I know that's a lot to throw at you, but whatever you could share there, I think would be of interest.
Yeah, I don't have that much specific to say about the targeting of Cyprus, other than to say, presumably it was pretty far down the list, but they've decentralized command of these mobile drone units, and it was someone's jobs to target Cyprus at some point, and they've done it. Unfortunately for them, they did it at the precise moment where countries were debating in Europe whether or not to get involved, and now they're likelier to get involved because Cyprus was targeted. Trump is also the X factor here. I think I was just reading before this started about his comments about Spain and cutting off trade with Spain for not supporting the war, et cetera. So you could, there was an announcement a couple days ago that the UK, France, and Germany stood ready to help in any way possible, even getting involved in the assault on Iran. And then, you see comments in the other direction, and Trump and his team criticizing the British. So I don't have a great prediction for where the EU states are going to land on this. But for the moment, in particular less because of the attack on Cyprus and much more because of the onslaught against the Gulf. I think Europe is invested in threat mitigation from Iran, at least as much and probably more than just a speedy end to the conflict. As for the terror attack, unconventional cyber, et cetera, in Europe, it's a risk. We were talking about the U.S. before, but when we talk about the Islamic Republic's aims to commit terror attacks, a lot of the plots that have been disrupted and kind of the areas of focus have been in parts of Europe that just are a little less politically sensitive from the Middle East perspective. So, for example, Greece, would they target a synagogue or an Israeli consulate or a resort where Israelis travel or something like that? Greece comes up a lot, or you can see something in a place like Bulgaria. I'm not just I'm throwing out random names. The point is that it doesn't have to be the Twin Towers. It just has to be successful. Right. From their perspective. So, you could even see attacks in Southeast Asia. They talk about, Israelis vacationing in Thailand. So yeah, those are the types of attacks that have historically been mentioned when we think about, Iranian linked terror in Europe. And cyber, I'm sure that's already going on. I know we've seen some denial of service attacks, and it's definitely happening. But I'm not sure. I will add, though, just like these, obviously anything centralized in the Islamic Republic's government is under attack or has already been attacked or has seen its headquarters collapse on itself. So the ability to pivot strategy is really difficult for them right now, which is part of why they built a defense plan that could be managed on a decentralized basis by, someone driving a truck with a drone on the back of it in the field. No one needed to tell him to fire the drone. I think there's probably a similar plan on the cyber front and anything else unconventional.
Thanks for that, Sam. And we're quite a bit into this now, past the halfway mark of the hour here. So maybe just a couple of other quick questions as we wrap up and bring Don back at the end here. I know that this is something you're thinking a lot about. I've seen your output on travel and all the different embassy details, short and long-term impacts to travel in and through the region. Could you share your thoughts, please?
Yes, it's hard to say. I think this is, again, as with many other things, as with oil prices, as with anything else, the concern is about how long this conflict lasts. Needless to say, the images of the Burj Al Arab in Dubai being on fire are going to stick with us for a long time. But if the conflict closes within a week versus within 6 weeks, it has a very different impact on the psychology of people considering travel to the region. That said, obviously I would expect people transiting the Gulf or visiting the Gulf, that will slow down for a little while, even if the conflict ended tomorrow. But, I think our hope is that, I don't want to say our hope, presumably the hope of the Gulf states and the US is that wherever this war ends, it ends with Iran in a less threatening place, and therefore this war is a one-time thing or is not an extended effort. I don't know if that's going to be the way things go. But right, the hope is that this kind of near-term instability is worthwhile to establish a long-term security that where travel is facilitated and indefinitely less complicated. But I'm not sure how close we are to that, I guess is what I would say.
And I'll weigh in on this as well. I mean, I think everyone needs to understand and appreciate that at this military stage, the US and Israel are asking for and demanding air supremacy. So they're going to need to fly their planes and everything else that goes with that through the region. And so therefore, commercial travel will be impacted. The commercial airlines are not going to risk getting shot down. This has happened in the past. It's a dangerous area. So it's going to be very difficult to get non-locally flagged airlines to take off and land, and therefore this is going to impact travel. So this is going to be on and off for quite some time. And at the end of the day, our travelers in the region will have to be flexible. And some of the Gulf countries are extending their hospitality, and I'm seeing reports that they're covering hotel bills and allowing people to stay longer and later. And where there's an opportunity to take off, whether it be from Riyadh or elsewhere, local travelers will have to be flexible to try to get to those locations.
Thanks, Don. It's great to have you on for the last couple questions here. I have two more I wanted to ask, and I think you'll have something to say about one of them, Don. And I think one is a particularly good one for Sam to take us kind of inside his work. But regarding the GCC and some of the attacks we've seen, one member of the audience is asking, do you believe that Iran mask launched against multiple targets in the Gulf to consume defensive weapons, or was it a miscalculation that this might sever them from the U.S.-Israeli strikes?
Sam, you want that one?
Uh, sure. Yeah, I think I've spoken a lot about this idea that the plans were kind of pre-calibrated so that no one needed to issue orders. I think they probably anticipated that the first strike might be the one that kills the entire command structure, which to some degree did happen. So uh, I think there was just an idea of, look, I'll back up and say almost all of Iran's military capabilities were meant as to be deterrents to attacking them, much more than they were meant to be used. So this plan to attack everyone all at once is not actually a good strategy. It was a good deterrent to say they could do it, to say we've, given authority to commanders in the field or, the guy in the truck driving across the country with the drone in the back. That's that's a good thing to be able to say to scare the world away from attacking you. But once it actually comes time to do it, I don't know that it's that productive. That said, there is a definite tactic, there's a strategy of trying to get through the air defense stocks of these countries. And I think that would be primarily executed through the drone arsenal because it's much larger. Maybe they started this conflict with a couple thousand ballistic missiles. They're probably, under a few hundred now. I don't have updated. No one has updated numbers, but it doesn't matter how many drones they fire. They can pretty much always fire more, and they're not kept in a central location where they can be targeted. So I don't want to credit them with having planned that for strategic purposes in the context of winning a war, but they planned it in the context of discouraging a war, which in that sense,
And I'll take it a step further. I'll take it a step further. I'll say that it is my belief that they overplayed their hand too soon. And I think that this concept of deterrence didn't work and, in fact, inflamed the situation further. And we will, I'm sure, be seeing in the coming hours, if not days, actions from the Saudis and other GCC nations against Iran. So I think it backfired to a certain extent.
Great. Well, let's just do one more question. And I think it's an interesting one because, Sam, I've been in touch with you a lot the last few days. I know it's, been an extraordinary couple days for you. A member of the audience was asking how to discern false reports on social media videos versus the truth. Many times there are real looking naval or aerial conflict scenarios that when looked at turn out to be video game simulations. Anyone can post anything at all with high quality deepfake technology available to all. What's it like for you as an analyst to parse through all of the information out there? And how do you manage any sort of bias that you have in this conflict?
Right. Before Sam goes into this, I'll just give the Interfor perspective from the side of the operation that is actually scouring for deep fakes and scouring for a lot of false news and ingesting a ton of the internet to look for these things and hunt for these things. I will say just the easy way of responding is don't believe everything you read and take everything with a grain of salt to the nth degree. And I think that is more relevant now than it's ever been because the sheer ability to create deep fakes, AI-driven video and segments and regurgitating old news and repackaging it is, has become weaponized. And it's weaponized not just by outsiders. It's weaponized by nation states and those trying to, kind of guide the syntax and guide what is being said and guide the messaging. So, what we're seeing online is being weaponized. And so it's very difficult for analysts to ingest, analyze, and assess the veracity of these pieces of information. So that's the Interfor perspective from how we're dealing with it on behalf of clients. But Sam, specifically as an Iran analyst, how are you taking it?
Yeah, I think look, there are actual techniques for doing this, and we don't always have time to use them. And when you don't have time to use them or you don't have the resources to actually vet content in depth yourself, you start with who are people I trust, who are people that I can follow if you're getting news from social media, who are right more often than not, who are people on social media who make it their entire business to tear down fake videos. And you just have to kind of select where you're getting your information from. The same goes for media outlets. And I will add that, like, the shortest of shortcuts is to trust media outlets and to not believe things until they are posted by a specific subset of media outlets, because they do have their own vetting. Not to say they can't be wrong, but it's much better than just seeing what you see on Twitter and assuming that it's true. When you do this on this topic for a while intensively, as I have, you start to recognize kind of the distribution routes that false stories travel through, and which countries they're originating from, and how to take that with a grain of salt, and kind of at what point it goes from something that's in doubt to being something that could be true based on where it's getting picked up and commented on. But look, there's just a massive amount. We're talking about thousands of strikes in both directions. So there's news items for kind of each one. So there's always going to be, even pre 2015, 2016, there would have been bad information in this moment. It's just worse now.
Yeah, let's do just one more quick question, then I'll let everybody go. It's too good there in the Q&A. Just real quick, it would be a great place to end. Best and worst case scenarios for how this all plays out. And Don, I'd welcome you to comment as well. Whoever wants to go first, go ahead.
Well, Sam's the expert. I will just say, obviously, we want peace in the region and we want peace in the global economy. I would say best case scenario from my perspective is regime change, but a healthy regime change. What that looks like is anyone's guess. And I'll let Sam take it from there.
Yeah, I was going to be annoying and say best case, worst case from whose perspective. Like when you're serving clients on this, it's not, you're not saying, this is an awful regime and we want to see them suffer or vengeance, whatever. That's not where your focus is. But I would agree with what Donna said. But from the Gulf perspective, the conflict ends quickly, and it ends such that Iran will never attack them again. And their relationship with the U.S. is stronger to some degree. Their relationship with Israel is maybe a little bit less tense. That would be a great scenario for them. Worst case probably is either that this goes on indefinitely, or that it ends, but is on and off again for a while. That would be really, really disruptive for the Gulf, which is a big focus of mine. So I think there's risks on both sides, risks of pushing too hard and risks of pushing not hard enough from the U.S. and Israeli side. They need to leave things in a manageable place, whether or not they're overthrowing a regime.
I mean, well said. Thank you for your time, Sam. Thank you for your assessment and your ongoing work. For those that don't know, Sam's been and his team have been up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week since this started, and they deserve a nice vacation at the end of all of this. To our clients and colleagues and friends out there, thank you very much for engaging with us. For those that want more engagement or want more intelligence and information and analyses, not just on this topic, but on any other topic that we cover, reach out. We'd be more than happy to curate and provide curated assessments and analyses to you directly. Here's hoping for a speedy end to this situation for all. And again, thank you very much. Our geopolitical risk division has never been busier, as many of you can imagine. And so reach out and let's engage directly. Again, Jeremy, thank you very much for hosting this, as you always do. And we're looking forward to the next session with all of you in due course. Thanks again, everyone. And for those that the answers that we did not get to or questions that we didn't get to, please reach out and we'll do our best to handle it offline.